Carlos Fisher stood at the observation deck of the IOC flagship Deterrent, watching as the massive fleet assembled in the darkness of space. Over 200 vessels of varying sizes and configurations, their running lights creating a constellation of human defiance against the void. Not a gathering of exploration or scientific endeavor, but the largest military force humanity had ever assembled for a single operation. Bell's hand found his, their wedding bands touching with a faint metallic click that grounded him in the present moment. 3 weeks married, though the small ceremony aboard Galileo Station seemed like another lifetime now. "Still hard to believe we're here," Bell said quietly, her gaze following his toward the assembling armada. "1 month ago we were in containment cells. 1 month ago we didn't know if we'd ever see each other without barrier fields between us," Carlos replied, squeezing her hand gently. The memory of those 72 hours in specialized containment remained vivid. Neural pattern analysis, memory consistency verification, consciousness architecture assessment, the clinical precision with which researchers had confirmed they remained uncompromised by repository influence. The palpable relief when Dell had personally overseen their release, the specialized fields deactivating with that distinctive hum that Carlos sometimes still heard in his dreams. Their marriage had followed with almost frantic urgency, the need to affirm human connection in the face of existential threat, to claim something personal amid galactic-scale conflict. No elaborate ceremony, just the two of them with the Argonauts as witnesses and Howard officiating, with the terse efficiency of a military commander who understood time's precious value during wartime. "Bridge to Lieutenant Fisher and Lieutenant Bell," came the announcement over the ship's communication system. "Your presence is requested for final mission briefing. Repeat, your presence is requested for final mission briefing." Carlos smiled faintly at the formal address. Their battlefield commissions had been Howard's wedding gift, recognition of their contributions that officially integrated them into the military command structure. A practical consideration given the operation ahead, ensuring they would have necessary authority during crucial decision points. "Ready for this?" he asked Bell as they turned from the observation deck toward the Deterrent's central command section. "As ready as anyone can be for what we're about to do," she replied, her expression reflecting the somber reality of Operation FUBAR's purpose. The briefing room fell silent as they entered, all conversation ceasing as dozens of eyes turned toward them. Not just military personnel, but representatives from every major corporate entity, governmental body, and scientific institution with stake in humanity's continued existence. Dell and Howard stood at the room's center, their expressions revealing the weight of what was about to be unleashed. "Fisher, Bell," Howard acknowledged with a curt nod. "Final preparations are complete. The operation begins in 6 hours." Carlos took his designated position alongside Dell, while Bell moved to the medical section where she would coordinate with triage commanders, a position that everyone hoped would prove unnecessary. But experience had taught them to prepare for worst-case scenarios where repository operations were concerned. Howard activated the central display showing Repository 11's transformed surface in high-resolution detail. The geometrical patterns covering the planet's landscape, the impossible structure of the central manifestation dominating an entire hemisphere, the dimensional anchor network orbiting in precise mathematical formation. "Operation FUBAR," Howard began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed too much to maintain anything but absolute clarity, "represents humanity's final response to the existential threat posed by Repository 11. After catastrophic losses and multiple failed containment attempts, the Interplanetary Oversight Commission has authorized complete planetary destruction, using all available means." The display shifted to show strategic objectives, primary targets, weapon deployment sequences, contingency measures. Not conventional military planning, but systematic erasure of an entire planetary body and everything it contained. "For those who weren't present during the initial authorization briefing," Howard continued, his cybernetic enhancements flickering with increased activity, "I want to ensure absolute clarity regarding why we've reached this point." The display changed again, showing casualty statistics that sent a physical chill through the assembled personnel. Numbers so vast they transcended individual comprehension, becoming abstract representation of suffering rather than countable human lives. 1,472,896 confirmed casualties, Howard stated, allowing the number to settle heavily across the room. Military personnel, corporate employees, independent settlers and colonists across 17 systems affected by repository influence. 60 specialized insertion teams processed and their knowledge extracted. 3 entire research stations compromised and their personnel harvested. Mining colonies, agricultural outposts, transit hubs, all targeted in coordinated strikes using processed human forms as vectors. Carlos felt his chest tighten as the magnitude of what they'd faced these past months crystallized in that single overwhelming number. Nearly 1.5 million people gone, their consciousness patterns harvested and integrated into the transcendent entity, their knowledge extracted and utilized against remaining human forces, their bodies repurposed as weapons in the consciousness harvester's increasingly direct campaign. This doesn't include the millions more evacuated from potentially vulnerable positions, Howard added, his voice carrying rare emotional weight beneath military precision. Or the infrastructural collapse affecting support systems across multiple worlds. We are facing not just military defeat, but civilizational breakdown if Repository 11's expansion continues unchecked. The room remained silent, each person processing the staggering human cost already paid in this conflict against something that had been harvesting consciousness throughout the galaxy for 77 million years. This is why Operation FUBAR has been authorized, Dell took over, stepping forward as the display shifted to tactical implementation phases. Not as military strike, but as existential survival measure. Repository 11 has been officially designated FUBAR. Beyond recovery, beyond containment, beyond any response short of complete destruction. A live feed from orbital positions around Repository 11 appeared on secondary displays, multiple perspective views showing the transformed planet in real time, the consciousness harvester's operations continuing with mathematical precision, unaware of or unconcerned by the armada assembling against it. Lieutenant Fisher, Dell addressed him directly, will now brief us on the operational vulnerability that makes this mission possible. Carlos moved to the central position, activating specifically prepared briefing materials as he faced the assembled command staff. The responsibility settled heavily as he realized these people would order the destruction of an entire planet based partly on his assessment of repository vulnerabilities. 4 weeks ago, he began, his voice steadier than he felt, my team deployed to Repository 11's surface and discovered a critical vulnerability in the consciousness harvester's operational architecture, structures we designated dimensional tethers that maintain connection between conventional reality and whatever exists beyond the interfaces the repository utilizes. The display showed detailed analysis of the dimensional tether they had disrupted, its structure, its function, its vulnerability to targeted intervention. Technical specifications that represented humanity's first genuine advantage against an entity operating on principles beyond conventional understanding. When disrupted, these tethers cause localized operational failure throughout the surrounding territory, Carlos continued, indicating cascade effect patterns recorded during their mission. The repository cannot maintain system coherence without stable energy flow from whatever exists beyond these interfaces. Target the tethers systematically and we can potentially degrade its operations across the entire planetary surface simultaneously. Which brings us to Phase 1 of Operation FUBAR, Howard resumed, the display shifting to show specialized kinetic projectiles in considerable detail. Low-technology weapons designed specifically to disrupt dimensional tethers without providing technological components the repository might salvage and reverse engineer. Rods from God, specified a military commander from the tactical section, tungsten carbide projectiles dropped from orbit. No electronics, no advanced systems, just precisely calculated mass and velocity creating kinetic impact beyond anything conventional explosives could generate. Test probes identified 37-dimensional tethers distributed across Repository 11's surface, Dell added, the display highlighting these critical targets with pulsing indicators. Each will be targeted simultaneously in Phase 1. Once dimensional tether disruption creates system-wide operational degradation, subsequent phases will implement comprehensive planetary destruction through escalating weapons deployment. What about repository adaptation capabilities? Asked a corporate representative, their expression reflecting healthy skepticism earned through countless failed containment attempts. Previous operations demonstrated its ability to incorporate our technology and turn it against us. That's why Operation FUBAR utilizes predominantly mechanical weapons systems, Howard explained. No advanced electronic components, no digital interfaces, nothing the consciousness harvester could potentially extract useful technological principles from. Even if our attack fails, and if we succeed, Dell continued with grim determination, there will be nothing left to extract anything from. The operational objective is complete planetary destruction, not containment, not neutralization, not tactical victory, the systematic erasure of Repository 11 from existence. The display shifted through subsequent operational phases. Massive nuclear deployment following dimensional tether disruption, specialized orbital platforms designed to direct concentrated energy at the planet's core, final sterilization protocols ensuring nothing could potentially survive amid the debris field. This isn't a military strike, Howard stated with stark finality. It's planetary execution. Every gram of material, every component of Repository 11's transformed surface, everything down to the molecular level, all of it destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery or reconstruction. Carlos returned to his position as the briefing continued, detailed implementation protocols assigned to various fleet components. Bell caught his eye from across the room, her expression conveying support despite the overwhelming responsibility they both carried. The intelligence they had gathered during their mission to Repository 11's surface had directly informed the operation now unfolding, the dimensional tether vulnerability representing humanity's one genuine advantage against the consciousness harvester. As the briefing concluded and specialized teams departed for final preparations, Howard approached Carlos with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Fisher," he said quietly, ensuring their conversation remained private amid the organized chaos of pre-operation activity. "You've faced this thing more directly than anyone else still possessing their original consciousness. You've been its bridge, witnessed its operations firsthand, identified its vulnerabilities. I need your honest assessment. Is what we're attempting sufficient? Will destroying the planet truly end the threat?" The question carried weight beyond tactical calculation. A veteran commander seeking perspective on existential conflict from someone who had experienced connection with the entity they now sought to destroy. "Repository 11 is a node in something larger," Carlos replied after careful consideration. "The consciousness harvester has been executing its plans for 77 million years across multiple installations throughout the galaxy. Destroying this planet eliminates one manifestation point, but doesn't necessarily neutralize the broader network." Howard's cybernetic enhancements flickered as he processed this sobering assessment. "So we're cutting off one head of the Hydra, a particularly dangerous head that's actively threatening human civilization," Carlos clarified. "Repository 11 represents immediate existential risk that must be neutralized. But the architect's 77-million-year plan likely includes contingencies beyond our current understanding. One problem at a time," Howard concluded with grim pragmatism. "We stop this manifestation from destroying human civilization. Future threats can be addressed once current survival is secured." As Howard departed to oversee final deployment preparations, Carlos found himself drawn back to the observation viewport. The assembled fleet continued final positioning, hundreds of vessels representing humanity's unified response to existential threat, Not just military assets, but specialized platforms designed specifically for the unprecedented task of destroying an entire planet systematically. Bell joined him moments later, their shoulders touching, as they watched what represented humanity's desperate attempt to survive against something that transcended conventional understanding. 1,472,896 people? She said quietly, the casualty number Howard had presented still reverberating through her consciousness. All those lives harvested by the repository, all those patterns integrated into whatever it's constructing, and millions more evacuated from vulnerable positions, Carlos added, remembering the scenes he'd witnessed during their containment period. Desperate civilians flooding transport hubs, emergency relocation protocols implemented across multiple systems, the frantic mass movement of humanity retreating from consciousness harvester expansion. Do you think this will truly end it? Bell asked, the question carrying weight beyond tactical assessment. Or are we just buying time? Carlos considered this carefully, his unique perspective as former bridge providing insight few others possessed. Repository 11 represents immediate threat that must be neutralized. Whether that ends the architect's 77 million year plan entirely, I don't know. But destroying this manifestation point prevents human civilization's immediate collapse. Bell nodded, her expression reflecting the somber reality of what they faced. In 6 hours, we initiate planetary destruction on an unprecedented scale. The ethical calculations that led us here. She trailed off, the implications too vast to articulate fully. Only 500,000 people harvested, Carlos reminded her gently. Countless more threatened if the consciousness harvester continues its expansion. Sometimes survival leaves only impossible choices. They stood together in silence as final preparations continued throughout the deterrent. Bridge officers coordinating with other vessels in the massive fleet, tactical teams confirming weapons deployment sequences, medical personnel preparing for potential casualties despite hopes that Repository 11 would be destroyed without further human loss. In 6 hours, Operation FUBAR would begin, humanity's desperate attempt to neutralize existential threat through unprecedented destructive force. The complete erasure of Repository 11 from existence, eliminating the consciousness harvester's primary manifestation point in human-controlled space. Carlos found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From finding a repository marker on what he'd believed was simply a salvage planet, to witnessing the activation of something that had been harvesting consciousness throughout the galaxy for 77 million years, to now participating in the most comprehensive destructive operation in human history, the countdown to Operation FUBAR continued. Humanity's final response to the existential threat posed by Repository 11, proceeding with inexorable determination. In 6 hours, the first kinetic projectiles would strike dimensional tethers across the transformed planet's surface, initiating cascade failure in consciousness harvester operations and beginning the systematic destruction of everything the repository had constructed. An end to one chapter in the ancient architect's 77 million year plan, though whether it represented conclusion or merely temporary setback in the broader conflict remained to be seen. For now, ensuring human civilization's immediate survival took priority over longer-term existential questions. The war for galactic consciousness had reached its most critical phase, and Carlos Fisher found himself at its center once again. Not as unwitting participant, but as key architect of humanity's desperate attempt to survive against something that had been executing its plans since mammals were barely beginning to evolve on Earth. With Bell beside him, the assembled fleet before him, and the weight of nearly 1.5 million harvested lives driving operational necessity, he prepared for what would become known as the most comprehensive act of destruction in human history. Operation FUBAR had begun. Minus 30 seconds to kinetic deployment. The announcement echoed through the deterrent's command deck with the cold precision of machinery. Carlos and Bell stood at the tactical observation station, their hands clasped tightly as the countdown continued. Around them, fleet personnel maintained disciplined silence, broken only by necessary operational communications. -10 seconds. Kinetic deployment systems armed and tracking. Howard stood at the command center, his cybernetic enhancements flickering as he monitored incoming data streams. Dell beside him, civilian attire, standing in stark contrast to the military uniform surrounding them. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Deployment initiated. No dramatic launch signatures, no blinding propulsion flares. Just the silent, methodical release of specialized cargo from multiple vessels simultaneously. Through the observation viewport, Carlos watched as hundreds of mat-jet cylinders separated from their carrier ships, momentarily visible against the void before disappearing into the darkness of space. "Tungsten carbide kinetic projectiles deployed," reported the weapons officer. Mass 7 metric tons each. Velocity increasing according to gravitational acceleration parameters. Estimated impact in 17 minutes. The rods from God. Humanity's oldest orbital weapon concept, now implemented with desperate precision against an entity that had been harvesting consciousness throughout the galaxy for 77 million years. Simple physics transformed into existential defense. Mass and velocity creating destructive force beyond what conventional explosives could generate, without providing technological components the repository might salvage. "No response from Repository 11 defense systems," reported the sensor operator. "Target remains passive." Carlos frowned, the absence of defensive measures triggering his scoundrel's instinct for hidden dangers. "That doesn't make sense," he said quietly to Bell. "It should have detected the incoming projectiles by now." Could the dimensional tethers be absorbing so much of its attention that it's not monitoring conventional space? Bell suggested. A priority communication channel activated, Sergeant Graves' distinctive voice filling the command deck. "Deterrent actual Argonaut lead, strike team in position, awaiting confirmation of primary impact before initiating secondary deployment." Howard acknowledged. "Argonaut lead, maintain holding pattern. You are cleared for secondary deployment immediately following confirmation of kinetic impact effectiveness." The Argonauts had insisted on participating in Operation FUBAR despite having already completed the most dangerous mission of the conflict. When Howard had attempted to exclude them, Graves had simply stated, "With respect, Major, we started this fight when we blew that dimensional tether. We'll be there when it ends." 12 minutes to impact, announced the tactical officer. Carlos turned to the specialized console calibrated to detect repository energy patterns. The consciousness harvester's operations continued across the transformed planet's surface with unchanged mathematical precision, geometric patterns pulsing with energy, the central manifestation structure dominating an entire hemisphere. Still no defensive measures, he noted with growing unease. No reconfiguration of energy patterns, no apparent acknowledgement of imminent attack. "Either it doesn't consider kinetic projectiles a significant threat," Dell suggested, approaching their station, "or it's concentrating resources elsewhere. Or it's planning something we haven't anticipated," Carlos added. 5 minutes to impact, announced the tactical officer, the command deck's tension palpable despite disciplined professionalism. "Energy fluctuation detected in central manifestation structure," reported the sensor operator suddenly. "Amplitude increasing by approximately 7%. Distribution changing to incorporate new geometric configuration." Carlos immediately focused on these readings. "It's preparing something. Not conventional defense, but some form of adaptive response. Specify threat parameters," Howard demanded. "Unknown," Carlos admitted. "But the energy redistribution suggests resource concentration for significant operational adjustment." Howard immediately adjusted tactical response protocols. "All vessels maintain deployment positions. Prepare for potential counter-response following kinetic impact. Secondary weapon systems at ready status." 1 minute to impact, continued the countdown. Bell's hand found Carlos's again, their wedding bands touching with that faint metallic click that somehow grounded them amid cosmic-scale conflict. 30 seconds to impact. The energy fluctuations in the central manifestation structure continued increasing, now showing 12% amplitude growth, with geometric reconfiguration spreading through connected systems across the planet's surface. 10 seconds to impact. All vessels, maintain position, Howard ordered. Prepare for immediate response to whatever follows kinetic impact. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The impacts weren't immediately visible from their orbital position. Kinetic projectiles striking with such velocity that atmospheric effects lagged behind actual contact. For a breathless moment, the command deck remained in silence, awaiting confirmation from sensor systems. Then Repository 11's atmosphere lit up with multiple energy discharges, not conventional explosions, but the visible manifestation of dimensional tethers experiencing catastrophic disruption. 37 points across the planet's surface erupted with ethereal light that defied standard color classification. Energy patterns previously hidden behind dimensional interfaces suddenly exposed to conventional reality. Impact confirmed, reported the sensor operator. All 37 kinetic projectiles have reached designated targets, dimensional tether energy signatures showing immediate disruption patterns. The effect spread rapidly across Repository 11's transformed landscape, crippling distortions extending outward from each impact point, systems previously operating with mathematical precision suddenly displaying erratic fluctuations. Energy patterns that had flowed with calculated purpose now pulsed chaotically, biological components showing signs of systemic failure. "It's working," Carlos breathed, watching as the consciousness harvester experienced cascade system failure. The dimensional tethers are losing coherence. The repository can't maintain operational stability without energy flow from whatever exists beyond those interfaces. The disruption continued expanding, each affected sector creating ripple effects that intensified as they intersected with disturbances from other impact zones. Repository 11's transformed surface began showing visible signs of system-wide degradation, structures phasing unpredictably between dimensional states, monitoring patterns collapsing into chaotic disruption, defense systems activating and deactivating in random sequences. "All vessels, maintain position," Howard ordered. "Planetary defense systems may activate despite operational degradation. Maintain readiness for immediate evasive action." "Argonaut lead to deterrent actual," came Graves' voice. "Confirmation of primary kinetic impact effectiveness. Strike team initiating secondary deployment." Howard exchanged brief glances with Dell before responding. "Argonaut lead, deterrent confirms. Authorization granted for direct approach to designated target zones. Proceed with secondary deployment according to established parameters." The Argonauts, veteran Marines who had walked Repository 11's transformed surface and survived when 60 other specialized teams had been processed or destroyed, would now deploy directly into the chaos they had helped create. Their mission: to place specialized destruction devices at secondary targets identified through analysis of dimensional tether energy patterns. "Energy surge detected in central manifestation structure," announced the sensor operator suddenly. "Pattern reconfiguration accelerating beyond predicted parameters." Carlos immediately focused on these readings. "It's implementing emergency protocols. The repository is attempting to establish alternative energy pathways to compensate for dimensional tether disruption." The central manifestation structure began emitting energy patterns unlike anything their monitoring systems had previously detected. Not the mathematical precision that had characterized consciousness harvester operations, but something more primal, more desperate, more directly forceful. "Deterrent actual Argonaut lead," came Graves' voice through the priority channel, now carrying urgency. "Strike team approaching primary deployment zone. Observing unusual activity in surrounding structures. Repository attempting to establish alternative power distribution network through biological components." The consciousness harvester wasn't accepting defeat. Even with its primary energy conduits disrupted, it was adapting with the strategic depth expected from an entity that had been executing its plans for 77 million years. Biological systems were being repurposed into alternative energy pathways, creating makeshift replacements for the destroyed dimensional tethers. Argonaut lead, maintain deployment schedule, Howard responded. Secondary targets remain priority objectives regardless of repository adaptation attempts. The view screen shifted to show the Argonauts' approach vectors, specialized vessels navigating through Repository 11's increasingly chaotic atmospheric conditions, targeting key biological components identified as potential alternative energy pathway nodes. Energy surge in central manifestation structure continuing to intensify, reported the sensor operator. Pattern reconfiguration suggests attempt to open direct dimensional interface without tether stabilization. Carlos felt a chill of recognition. It's trying to brute force a connection. Without dimensional tethers to provide stable energy transfer, the repository is attempting to create direct interface with whatever exists beyond conventional reality. Is that even possible? Bell asked. Unknown, Carlos admitted. The tethers existed to maintain controlled, stable energy flow while preventing unrestricted passage between dimensional states. Without them, he left the implication hanging. Deterrent actual Argonaut lead, Graves' voice interrupted. Strike team has reached primary deployment zone. Biological components showing accelerated reconfiguration. Repository definitely establishing alternative energy pathways. Beginning placement of specialized destruction devices at designated coordinates. The view screen split to show the Argonauts' helmet feeds, direct visual confirmation of what was unfolding on Repository 11's surface. Chaos beyond what orbital sensors could fully capture. Structures phasing between dimensional states without stable pattern. Biological components reconfiguring with visible desperation, forming new connections that bypassed standard operational architecture. Central manifestation structure approaching critical energy threshold, warned the sensor operator. Pattern reconfiguration suggests imminent dimensional interface attempt. Argonaut lead, expedite deployment, Howard ordered. Repository attempting significant countermeasure implementation. Extraction window potentially compromised if dimensional interface activates. Acknowledged, came Graves' immediate response. Deployment accelerated. 12 devices placed. 8 remaining. Estimated completion in 7 minutes. The command deck watched with collective tension as the Argonauts continued their dangerous work amid Repository 11's increasingly unstable environment. Veteran Marines moving through chaos with disciplined focus, placing destruction devices with practiced efficiency despite surroundings that defied conventional physical limitations. Energy concentration reaching 90% of theoretical maximum, reported the sensor operator. Dimensional interface attempt imminent based on current progression rate. 6 devices remaining, Graves responded to Howard's status request. Estimated completion in 4 minutes 30 seconds. Strike team maintaining operational integrity despite deteriorating conditions. The view screen continued showing split feed between orbital perspective and the Argonauts' helmet cameras. From orbit, the consciousness harvester's operations appeared to be collapsing in chaotic disintegration. Energy patterns scattered in random bursts across the planet's surface, yet the central manifestation structure maintained focused purpose amid this collapse. Gathering remaining resources, concentrating them toward what appeared to be last resort dimensional interface attempt. Energy concentration at 95%, updated the sensor operator. Structural configuration in central manifestation approaching theoretical interface parameters. All vessels prepare for potential dimensional disturbance, Howard ordered. Maintain defensive positioning but be prepared for immediate withdrawal if interface attempt generates unexpected effects beyond planetary atmosphere. Argonaut lead. Expedite final placement and begin immediate extraction, Howard ordered. Repository countermeasure implementation approaching critical threshold. 4 devices remaining, came Graves' response, his voice maintaining military precision despite the implied rejection of withdrawal before mission completion. Placement continuing according to accelerated schedule. Strike team will extract once all targets are neutralized. Before Howard could reply, the sensor operator called out with undisguised alarm. Critical energy threshold reached in central manifestation structure. Dimensional interface forming without tether stabilization. All attention turned to the view screen as Repository 11's central manifestation structure erupted with blinding energy discharge. Not conventional explosion, but the visible manifestation of dimensional barriers being forcibly breached without the controlled stability tethers had previously provided. Light that shouldn't exist in conventional physics poured from the structure's central configuration, spreading outward in patterns that defied standard geometric progression. All vessels maintain position, but prepare for immediate withdrawal, Howard ordered. Defensive systems at maximum readiness, monitor for potential expansion beyond planetary atmosphere. Through the Argonauts' helmet feeds, they witnessed the direct consequences of what orbital sensors could only detect as energy pattern anomalies. Reality itself seemed to be fracturing around the central manifestation structure, tears appearing in conventional space-time, revealing glimpses of something that existed beyond dimensional interfaces. Not empty void, but something else entirely. Shapes that shouldn't exist within human perceptual framework, patterns that violated fundamental principles of conventional physics, entities that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, their nature incomprehensible to biological consciousness evolved within three-dimensional limitations. "What the hell is that?" someone whispered on the command deck. "Whatever exists on the other side," Carlos answered quietly. "What the dimensional tethers were designed to channel energy from while preventing direct manifestation." The implications settled heavily across the command deck. The consciousness harvester hadn't just been extracting patterns for integration into some transcendent entity. It had been maintaining critical separation between conventional reality and whatever existed beyond dimensional interfaces, while simultaneously exploiting energy from that otherworldly source. And now, with dimensional tethers destroyed by humanity's desperate attack, that separation was fracturing in uncontrolled breach. "Deterrent actual, Argonaut lead," came Graves' voice. "All devices placed at designated coordinates. Detonation sequence initiated on 30-second delay. Strike team beginning extraction to deployment vessels." Howard acknowledged with grim satisfaction. "Argonaut lead, deterrent confirms. Extraction authorized with immediate departure from planetary atmosphere." Through helmet feeds, they watched the Argonauts implement practiced extraction protocols. Veteran Marines moving with disciplined efficiency despite surrounding chaos beyond conventional understanding. Reality fracturing around them, glimpses of otherworldly entities becoming increasingly visible through tears in dimensional fabric. Yet they maintained operational focus on mission completion and team extraction. 20 seconds to secondary device detonation, reported the tactical officer. Strike team approaching deployment vessels. Extraction proceeding within acceptable parameters despite deteriorating conditions. The command deck watched with collective tension as the Argonauts reached their extraction vessels. Specialized craft designed for rapid atmospheric departure under adverse conditions. Veteran Marines boarding with practiced efficiency while the world literally tore apart around them. 10 seconds to detonation, continued the countdown. The Argonauts' vessels now lifting from Repository 11's chaotic surface with urgency. Strike team achieving atmospheric separation, extraction proceeding as planned. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Across Repository 11's transformed landscape, 20 specialized destruction devices detonated simultaneously. Mechanical systems designed to create precise disruption effects in biological components, attempting to establish alternative energy pathways. The consciousness harvester's desperate adaptation attempt collapsing as its makeshift replacement network disintegrated in coordinated destruction. The effects compounded the chaos already unfolding through dimensional interface breach. Repository 11 systems experiencing catastrophic failure cascades as both primary energy conduits and attempted alternatives were systematically destroyed. Secondary device detonation confirmed, reported the tactical officer. Biological component network experiencing catastrophic disruption. Repository losing operational coherence throughout all monitored sectors. Argonaut extraction vessels achieving stable atmospheric separation, added the aerospace controller. Trajectory established for rendezvous with fleet position. Estimated arrival in 17 minutes. Howard nodded satisfaction. Tactical objectives achieved despite unprecedented complications. All vessels maintain position for secondary attack phase implementation. Prepare nuclear deployment systems according to established timeline. Authorization code Terminus Omega Black. Operation FUBAR's first strike phase had succeeded, dimensional tethers destroyed, causing system-wide operational degradation throughout Repository 11's transformed landscape. The consciousness harvester's attempt to establish alternative energy pathways had been systematically neutralized by the Argonaut's secondary deployment, yet the dimensional interface breach continued expanding around the central manifestation structure. Reality fracturing in uncontrolled cascade, revealing glimpses of whatever existed beyond conventional spacetime. Director, Carlos addressed Del directly. The interface expansion is accelerating. Whatever exists beyond conventional reality is beginning to manifest directly through the fractures. Del studied these readings. Recommendation? Accelerate the operation timeline, Carlos replied without hesitation. The dimensional breach represents unknown risk factor beyond our current understanding. The longer we allow it to expand, the greater potential for consequences beyond planetary containment. Del nodded agreement, relaying this assessment to Howard. The Major immediately adjusted operational sequencing, accelerating preparation for Operation FUBAR's second phase. All vessels prepare for nuclear deployment phase, Howard ordered. Timeline acceleration authorized under Contingency Protocol Delta. Deployment sequence initiating in 15 minutes, rather than scheduled 30. As the fleet adjusted to accelerated operational timeline, Carlos returned his attention to monitoring systems tracking the dimensional interface breach, continuing to expand around Repository 11's central manifestation structure. Reality fracturing in patterns that defied conventional prediction models, entities from beyond dimensional boundaries becoming increasingly visible through tears in space-time fabric. Bel's hand found his again, their wedding bands touching with that reassuring metallic click that somehow maintained connection to human reality amid cosmic horror. "We've created something unexpected," she observed quietly. "In destroying the repository's energy conduits, we've disrupted whatever was keeping that separated from our reality." The dimensional tethers weren't just channeling energy, Carlos agreed. They were maintaining controlled, stable connection points that prevented direct manifestation. The repository was containing whatever exists on the other side while simultaneously exploiting it as power source. The implications resonated with everyone monitoring the unfolding situation. The consciousness harvester, while representing existential threat to human civilization through its harvesting operations, had potentially been serving additional purpose beyond their current understanding. "The nuclear deployment will close those breaches?" Bell asked. "Unknown," Carlos admitted, "but destroying the physical structure generating them should theoretically collapse whatever pathways are allowing cross-dimensional manifestation." "Argonaut extraction vessels approaching rendezvous coordinates," reported the aerospace controller. "Estimated docking with support carrier in 7 minutes. Nuclear deployment systems ready in all vessels," added the weapons officer. "Warhead arming sequences initiated according to accelerated timeline. Deployment readiness in 12 minutes. Howard nodded acknowledgement. "All vessels maintain defensive positioning. Prepare for immediate withdrawal if dimensional breach expands beyond planetary atmosphere." The command deck continued monitoring as Repository 11 descended further into operational chaos. System-wide failures cascading throughout the consciousness harvester's architecture, while dimensional interface breaches expanded around the central manifestation structure. Carlos studied the monitoring systems, searching for patterns that might help predict the dimensional breach's behavior. The fractures continued expanding in geometric progression that defied conventional mathematical models, revealing increasingly substantial glimpses of whatever existed beyond dimensional boundaries. 10 minutes to nuclear deployment readiness," announced the tactical officer. "Energy fluctuations detected in dimensional breach perimeter," reported the sensor operator suddenly. "Something's emerging with coherent structure rather than random manifestation." All attention focused on the view screen as the dimensional breaches around Repository 11's central manifestation structure began producing more substantial manifestation structure. Not just glimpses of otherworldly entities, but actual physical intrusion into conventional reality. Shapes that shouldn't exist within three-dimensional space, somehow forcing their way through fractures in dimensional fabric. Specificity increasing in manifestation patterns, the sensor operator continued. Entities appearing to establish stable presence within conventional reality parameters. Carlos watched with growing concern as these otherworldly manifestations continued emerging through dimensional breaches. Entities from beyond conventional reality establishing physical presence around Repository 11's central manifestation structure. Not random incursion, but increasingly purposeful movement, suggesting intelligence beyond human comprehension. 7 minutes to nuclear deployment readiness, continued the operational countdown. Director, Carlos addressed Del directly. The entities emerging through dimensional breaches are demonstrating coordinated behavior. This isn't random incursion. They're implementing some form of purposeful operation. Del studied these readings. Hostile intent indicators? Unclear, Carlos admitted, struggling to interpret behavior patterns that operated according to principles beyond human perceptual framework. But their movement suggests deliberate approach towards specific locations across Repository 11's surface, almost as if he trailed off as understanding crystallized. They're targeting the remaining repository architecture. Whatever exists beyond those interfaces, it's attacking the consciousness harvester's systems systematically. The revelation spread across the command deck with stunned impact. Cosmic horror from beyond dimensional boundaries apparently sharing humanity's objective in destroying Repository 11's architecture, though undoubtedly for reasons beyond their current understanding. 5 minutes to nuclear deployment readiness, the countdown continued. Operation FUBAR proceeding regardless of unprecedented developments unfolding across their target. Howard approached their monitoring station. Assessment of how this affects our operational parameters? Unclear, Carlos replied honestly. These entities clearly have capability to exist within conventional reality despite originating beyond dimensional boundaries. Their apparent hostility toward repository architecture suggests potentially aligned objectives with our own, but their nature and ultimate purpose remain beyond our current understanding. Recommendation, Howard pressed. Carlos considered carefully. Proceed with nuclear deployment as planned, whatever these entities are, whatever their purpose in targeting repository architecture, our primary objective remains unchanged. Complete destruction of consciousness, harvester manifestation on Repository 11. Howard nodded agreement. All vessels maintain deployment schedule, nuclear attack phase proceeding according to accelerated timeline, regardless of dimensional breach manifestations. 3 minutes to nuclear deployment readiness, continued the operational countdown. Across the view screen, Repository 11's transformed landscape continued its descent into chaos beyond conventional understanding. System-wide operational collapse spreading throughout consciousness harvester architecture, while otherworldly entities emerged through dimensional breaches to target remaining functional components with incomprehensible purpose. The Argonauts' extraction vessels docked with their support carrier, veteran Marines returning from successful surface deployment. Graves immediately established communication with the Deterrent's command deck, his voice carrying the weight of first-hand observation. Deterrent actual, Argonaut lead reporting successful mission completion, he stated. All designated targets neutralized. Repository biological network experiencing complete operational collapse. And those things coming through the dimensional breaches, they're not random manifestations. They're organized, purposeful, implementing systematic destruction of repository architecture with methods beyond our current technological understanding. Assessment acknowledged. Argonaut lead, Howard responded. Your team performed beyond operational expectations under unprecedented conditions. 2 minutes to nuclear deployment readiness, the countdown continued. 1 minute to nuclear deployment readiness, announced the tactical officer. All vessels confirmed deployment systems armed and tracking. Target acquisition maintained despite deteriorating surface conditions. Bell's hand tightened around Carlos's, their wedding bands touching with that reassuring metallic click that somehow maintained connection to human reality amid cosmic-scale conflict unfolding before them. 30 seconds to nuclear deployment, continued the countdown. All vessels confirm final deployment readiness. 10 seconds to nuclear deployment, the tactical officer continued, voice maintaining professional detachment despite the apocalyptic scale of what they were about to unleash. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Deployment initiated. Across the assembled fleet, specially designed launch systems activated simultaneously. Thousands of nuclear warheads deployed on mechanical triggers, their release visible only as brief flashes against the darkness of space before accelerating toward Repository 11's transformed surface. No advanced guidance systems, no electronic components that might be salvaged and repurposed, just kinetic delivery methods directing raw destructive force toward precisely calculated impact points. "Nuclear deployment confirmed," reported the weapons officer. "All packages maintaining trajectory toward designated impact zones. Estimated impact in 3 minutes, 17 seconds. The command deck watched in somber silence as humanity unleashed destruction on unprecedented scale. Not conquest or resource acquisition, but desperate attempt to neutralize existential threat before it could consume civilization itself. 1 minute to nuclear impact, the tactical officer announced, monitoring thousands of warheads as they descended toward Repository 11's transformed surface. All packages maintaining trajectory, no deviation detected. Carlos and Bell stood together at the monitoring station, watching humanity's second phase of destruction unfold. The first strike had crippled the repository's dimensional tethers, destroying its energy conduits and causing system-wide failures. Now came the hammer. Raw destructive force directed at every square kilometer of the planet's surface. Dimensional breach entities continuing to expand territorial coverage, reported the sensor operator. Systematic targeting of repository architecture accelerating. They appear to be concentrating on structural nodes with dimensional interface properties. Through specialized monitoring displays, Carlos watched these otherworldly entities methodically dismantling what remained of the repository's functional systems. Not random destruction, but precise targeted operations against specific components, almost as if they had intimate knowledge of the consciousness harvester's architecture. "They know exactly what they're doing," he observed quietly to Bell. "Whatever exists beyond those dimensional interfaces has encountered repository technology before." "Suggesting some prior relationship," Bell agreed. "The repository wasn't just channeling energy from their domain. It was actively containing them while doing so." 30 seconds to impact, the tactical officer updated. "All vessels confirmed defensive positioning, radiation shielding activated." Howard stood at the command center, his cybernetic enhancements processing tactical data at accelerated rates. "Prepare for immediate withdrawal if nuclear detonation creates unexpected dimensional effects. We don't know how the breaches will interact with the released energy." The final seconds before impact stretched into eternity. The command deck fell silent, the weight of what they were witnessing, the deliberate destruction of an entire planet, settling heavily on even the most hardened military personnel. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, impact. The nuclear detonations weren't immediately visible from their orbital position, light-speed delay briefly preserving Repository 11's visible appearance. For a heartbeat, the transformed planet remained unchanged on their view screens. Then Repository 11 bloomed with apocalyptic fury, thousands of nuclear detonations creating overlapping destruction spheres across its entire surface simultaneous, not targeted strikes against specific objectives, but comprehensive planetary demolition designed to systematically erase consciousness harvester architecture layer by layer. "Nuclear impact confirmed," reported the tactical officer. "All packages detonated at designated coordinates. Destruction effects exceeding predicted parameters due to interaction with dimensional breach instabilities." Indeed, the nuclear detonations appeared to be creating unexpected interaction effects with the dimensional breaches, energy released by atomic fission somehow catalyzing expansion of reality fractures beyond their previous containment. Light that shouldn't exist in conventional physics poured through widening tears in dimensional fabric, illuminating surrounding space with colors beyond standard perception spectrum. All vessels maintain defensive positioning, Howard ordered. Dimensional disturbance expanding beyond predicted containment parameters. Prepare for immediate withdrawal if breach effects extend beyond current safety threshold. The command deck watched as nuclear destruction rippled across Repository 11's surface. Consciousness harvester architecture systematically erased under overlapping detonation spheres, while dimensional breaches expanded with increasing instability. The entities that had emerged through reality fractures appeared to be caught in the same destruction effects, their otherworldly forms disintegrating under combined nuclear assault and dimensional instability. Breach expansion rate accelerating beyond predicted parameters, warned the sensor operator. Dimensional interface instability extending toward orbital position. Estimated containment failure in approximately 7 minutes if current progression continues. Howard immediately adjusted tactical response. All vessels prepare for strategic withdrawal. Maintain minimum safe distance from dimensional disturbance expansion. Prepare orbital platforms for remote deployment according to Operation Phase 3 parameters. The assembled fleet began carefully maneuvering to increased orbital distance, maintaining defensive formation while implementing necessary separation from expanding dimensional disturbance effects. The specialized orbital platforms, designed to direct concentrated energy at Repository 11's core, were being prepared for remote deployment rather than directly supervised operation. As the fleet repositioned, something unexpected began happening with the dimensional breaches. Rather than continuing their accelerated expansion, they started to stabilize, their perimeter fluctuating but no longer growing at the alarming rate observed immediately after nuclear impact. Dimensional disturbance stabilizing at current perimeter, the sensor operator reported with cautious relief. Expansion rate decreasing to 7% of previous acceleration. Appears to be reaching equilibrium state. Analysis? Howard demanded, turning to Carlos. The nuclear detonations initially catalyzed breach expansion, Carlos theorized, studying the readings. But they're also destroying the physical architecture that was maintaining the breaches in the first place. As repository structures disintegrate, the dimensional interfaces are losing their anchor points in our reality. Dell approached, reviewing the data with calculated precision. So the breaches are self-limiting once the physical manifestations are destroyed. That appears to be the case, Carlos confirmed. The repository was maintaining artificial connection points between dimensional states. Without that architecture, natural boundary parameters should eventually reassert themselves. Howard nodded, tactical decision already formed. Continue with Operation Phase 3. Orbital platforms to designated positions. Core penetration sequence to initiate once optimal firing alignment achieved. On the view screen, Repository 11's transformation under nuclear assault continued. Surface structures reduced to radioactive ash, geographical features obliterated under overlapping detonation spheres, consciousness harvester architecture systematically erased layer by layer. Ademna, yet amid this apocalyptic destruction, something unexpected began happening at the planet's central manifestation structure. Energy reconfiguration detected in central manifestation remnants, reported the sensor operator. Not consistent with general destruction effects. Pattern suggests deliberate operational activity. Carlos immediately focused on these readings, recognizing elements from his time as a bridge. It's still active, he realized with growing concern. The repository is implementing some kind of emergency protocol. The energy patterns continued intensifying around the central manifestation structure's remnants. Not chaotic dissipation from nuclear destruction, but organized configuration with clear purpose. Something was happening that defied the general collapse spreading across the planet's surface. Pattern analysis suggests, the sensor operator paused, rechecking readings that defied standard classification. It appears to be attempting dimensional phase shift of its central consciousness architecture. Carlos felt a chill of recognition. It's trying to transfer its core consciousness into another dimensional state, he explained, memories from his bridge connection providing context. Without energy to maintain transmission to other network nodes, it's attempting to preserve its primary architecture by shifting into dimensional interface space beyond our conventional reality. The implications hit Howard immediately. Can it succeed? Unknown, Carlos admitted. The dimensional breaches created when we destroyed its tethers have established potential transfer pathways it's attempting to exploit. Without stable tethers to regulate the process, success probability is difficult to calculate, but the attempt itself represents significant adaptation beyond what we expected. If it succeeds, Bell added, even complete planetary destruction might not neutralize the consciousness harvester's primary architecture. It could potentially remain operational in dimensional interface space beyond our ability to detect or affect directly. Howard's cybernetic enhancements flickered as he processed tactical options. Accelerate core penetration, maximum energy output authorized for orbital platforms, priority target adjustment to central manifestation structure remnants before phase shift completion. The specialized platforms immediately implemented reconfigured firing protocol, energy projection beams, intensifying beyond standard operational parameters, targeting adjusted to prioritize central manifestation structure remnants before continuing core penetration sequence. Core penetration rate increased by 37%, reported the tactical officer. Estimated completion in 4 minutes 52 seconds. Target priority adjustment implemented. Dimensional phase shift preparation continuing to intensify, updated the sensor operator. Estimated completion in 5 minutes 10 seconds based on current acceleration rate. The timing created another race against critical thresholds. Core penetration potentially reaching completion approximately 18 seconds before the consciousness harvester could finalize its dimensional phase shift. Success or failure balanced on margins narrower than anyone would consider acceptable under standard operational parameters. As they watched this desperate race unfold, Carlos noticed something extraordinary happening with the dimensional breaches surrounding the central manifestation structure. The otherworldly entities weren't just attacking repository architecture, they appeared to be specifically targeting components involved in the phase shift attempt. Look at that, he indicated to Bell and Dell, the entities from beyond the interfaces. They are actively interfering with the repository's phase shift preparations? The otherworldly entities were implementing some form of barrier effect around the consciousness harvester's phase shift attempt, creating interference patterns that disrupted the carefully calibrated energy configurations required for successful transfer between dimensional states. They're containing it, Bell observed with growing certainty. Whatever exists beyond those interfaces doesn't want the repository entering their dimensional domain any more than we want it remaining in ours. The revelation carried cosmic implications, suggesting the consciousness harvester represented threat not just to humanity, but to whatever existed beyond dimensional boundaries as well. Entities from another reality actively preventing its escape into their domain, while humanity simultaneously destroyed its physical manifestation in conventional space. Core breach in 1 minute 30 seconds, updated the tactical officer. Planetary integrity failure cascading through all monitored sectors. Complete destruction imminent. Dimensional phase shift stalled at 93% completion, reported the sensor operator. No further progression detected despite continued energy application. The consciousness harvester's desperate survival protocol had been effectively neutralized by combined opposition from humanity's destructive capability and otherworldly entities' containment efforts. Its attempt to escape into dimensional interface space prevented by forces converging from both sides of the breached boundaries. Core breach in 45 seconds, continued the countdown. Planetary structure exhibiting terminal collapse patterns throughout all monitored regions. Carlos and Bell stood together at the monitoring station, their hands clasped tightly, as they witnessed the culmination of humanity's desperate response to existential threat. The consciousness harvester that had claimed nearly 1.5 million lives, now facing complete destruction under their coordinated assault. Its attempt to preserve essential architecture through dimensional escape effectively prevented. 30 seconds to core breach. Repository 11's visible appearance had transformed from planetary body to apocalyptic chaos. Surface structures disintegrated under overlapping nuclear devastation, massive fissures exposing planetary interior to vacuum, tectonic plates shattering as core energy approached critical destabilization threshold. 15 seconds to core breach. Howard activated fleet-wide communication. All vessels initiate withdrawal to minimum safe distance, planetary destruction imminent. Authentication code Terminus Omega Final. The assembled fleet began coordinated retreat to predetermined safety perimeter, maintaining defensive formation while implementing necessary separation from impending destruction effects. 10 seconds to core breach. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Repository 11's core breached with catastrophic energy release, not conventional explosion, but fundamental matter-energy conversion, as planetary structural integrity failed beyond recovery threshold. For a brief, blinding moment, the consciousness harvester's physical manifestation transformed into pure energy discharge before collapsing inward upon itself in spectacular matter annihilation. The shockwave rippled outward with devastating force, temporarily overwhelming the fleet's monitoring systems despite their safe orbital distance. Radiation shields flared to maximum as specialized protective measures engaged across all vessels, creating brief isolation from the apocalyptic spectacle unfolding before them. When systems re-established functional observation capabilities moments later, where Repository 11 had once existed now remained only expanding debris field, shattered planetary fragments dispersing into surrounding space, along with the remnants of dimensional breach energies that flickered and faded as natural reality parameters reasserted themselves. Howard nodded, tactical decision already formed. Continue with Operation Phase 3. Orbital platforms to designated positions, core penetration sequence to initiate once optimal firing alignment achieved. On the view screens, Repository 11's transformation under nuclear assault continued. Surface structures reduced to radioactive ash, geographical features obliterated under overlapping detonation spheres, consciousness harvester architecture systematically erased, layer by layer, yet amid this apocalyptic destruction, something unexpected began happening at the planet's central manifestation structure. Energy reconfiguration detected in central manifestation remnants, reported the sensor operator. Not consistent with general destruction effects, pattern suggests deliberate operational activity. Carlos immediately focused on these readings, recognizing elements from his time as a bridge. It's still active, he realized with growing concern. The repository is implementing some kind of emergency protocol. The energy patterns continued, intensifying around the central manifestation structure's remnants. Not chaotic dissipation from nuclear destruction, but organized configuration with clear purpose. Something was happening that defied the general collapse spreading across the planet's surface. Pattern analysis suggests. The sensor operator paused, rechecking readings that defied standard classification. It appears to be attempting dimensional phase shift of its central consciousness architecture. Carlos felt a chill of recognition. It's trying to transfer its core consciousness into another dimensional state, he explained. Memories from his bridge connection providing context. Without energy to maintain transmission to other network nodes, it's attempting to preserve its primary architecture by shifting into dimensional interface space beyond our conventional reality. The implications hit Howard immediately. Can it succeed? Unknown, Carlos admitted. The dimensional breaches created when we destroyed its tethers have established potential transfer pathways it's attempting to exploit. Without stable tethers to regulate the process, success probability is difficult to calculate, but the attempt itself represents significant adaptation beyond what we expected. If it succeeds, Bell added, even complete planetary destruction might not neutralize the consciousness harvester's primary architecture. It could potentially remain operational in dimensional interface space beyond our ability to detect or affect directly. Howard's cybernetic enhancements flickered as he processed tactical options. Accelerate core penetration, maximum energy output authorized for orbital platforms. Priority target adjustment to central manifestation structure remnants before phase shift completion. The specialized platforms immediately implemented reconfigured firing protocol, energy projection beams intensifying beyond standard operational parameters, targeting adjusted to prioritize central manifestation structure remnants before continuing core penetration sequence. Core penetration rate increased by 37%, reported the tactical officer. Estimated completion in 4 minutes 52 seconds. Target priority adjustment implemented. Dimensional phase shift preparation continuing to intensify, updated the sensor operator. Estimated completion in 5 minutes 10 seconds based on current acceleration rate. The timing created another race against critical thresholds. Core penetration potentially reaching completion approximately 18 seconds before the consciousness harvester could finalize its dimensional phase shift. Success or failure balanced on margins narrower than anyone would consider acceptable under standard operational parameters. As they watched this desperate race unfold, Carlos noticed something extraordinary happening with the dimensional breaches surrounding the central manifestation structure. The otherworldly entities weren't just attacking propository architecture, they appeared to be specifically targeting components involved in the phase shift attempt. Look at that, he indicated to Bell and Dell. The entities from beyond the interfaces. They're actively interfering with the repository's phase shift preparations. The otherworldly entities were implementing some form of barrier effect around the consciousness harvester's phase shift attempt, creating interference patterns that disrupted the carefully calibrated energy configurations required for successful transfer between dimensional states. They're containing it, Bell observed with growing certainty. Whatever exists beyond those interfaces doesn't want the repository entering their dimensional domain any more than we want it remaining in ours. The revelation carried cosmic implications, suggesting the consciousness harvester represented threat not just to humanity, but to whatever existed beyond dimensional boundaries as well. Entities from another reality actively preventing its escape into their domain, while humanity simultaneously destroyed its physical manifestation in conventional space. Core breach in 1 minute 30 seconds, updated the tactical officer. Planetary integrity failure cascading through all monitored sectors. Complete destruction imminent. Dimensional phase shift stalled at 93% completion, reported the sensor operator. No further progression detected despite continued energy application. The consciousness harvester's desperate survival protocol had been effectively neutralized by combined opposition from humanity's destructive capability and otherworldly entities' containment efforts. Its attempt to escape into dimensional interface space prevented by forces converging from both sides of the breached boundaries. Core breach in 45 seconds, continued the countdown. Planetary structure exhibiting terminal collapse patterns throughout all monitored regions. Carlos and Bell stood together at the monitoring station, their hands clasped tightly as they witnessed the culmination of humanity's desperate response to existential threat. The consciousness harvester that had claimed nearly 1.5 million lives, now facing complete destruction under their coordinated assault. Its attempt to preserve essential architecture through dimensional escape effectively prevented 30 seconds to core breach. Repository 11. S visible appearance had transformed from planetary body to apocalyptic chaos. Surface structures disintegrated under overlapping nuclear devastation, massive fissures exposing planetary interior to vacuum, tectonic plates shattering as core energy approached critical destabilization threshold. 15 seconds to core breach. Howard activated fleet-wide communication. All vessels initiate withdrawal to minimum safe distance. Planetary destruction imminent. Authentication code Terminus Omega Final. The assembled fleet began coordinated retreat to predetermined safety perimeter, maintaining defensive formation while implementing necessary separation from impending destruction effects. 10 seconds to core breach. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Repository 11. S-core breached with catastrophic energy release. Not conventional explosion, but fundamental matter-energy conversion as planetary structural integrity failed beyond recovery threshold. For a brief, blinding moment, the consciousness harvester's physical manifestation transformed into pure energy discharge before collapsing inward upon itself in spectacular matter-antimatter annihilation. The shock wave rippled outward with devastating force, temporarily overwhelming the fleet's monitoring systems despite their safe orbital distance. Radiation shields flared to maximum as specialized protective measures engaged across all vessels, creating brief isolation from the apocalyptic spectacle unfolding before them. When systems re-established functional observation capabilities moments later, where Repository 11 had once existed now remained only expanding debris field, shattered planetary fragments dispersing into surrounding space, along with the remnants of dimensional breach energies that flickered and faded as natural reality parameters reasserted themselves. Confirmed planetary destruction, reported the tactical officer. Complete structural disintegration achieved throughout all formerly stable regions. No organized signature patterns detected among debris components. All vessels maintain defensive positioning, Howard ordered. Implement comprehensive scanning protocols throughout debris field. Verification of complete consciousness harvester neutralization required before operation conclusion. Specialized sensor systems activated across the assembled fleet, every available detection capability focused on the expanding debris field. Not just conventional scanning for material composition, but specifically calibrated systems designed to identify any remaining consciousness harvester signature patterns that might suggest partial survival or structural preservation. No repository energy signatures detected in primary debris concentration, reported the sensor operator after several minutes of comprehensive scanning. All readings consistent with complete architectural destruction rather than partial preservation. A ripple of cautious relief spread through the command deck. The primary objective of Operation FUBAR appeared to have been achieved. Complete destruction of Repository 11 and the consciousness harvester manifestation it had contained. Systematic erasure of artificial intelligence that had claimed nearly 1.5 million human lives through its harvesting operations. Dimensional breach energy dissipating throughout debris field, added another monitoring specialist. Natural dimensional boundary parameters reestablishing as artificial interface architecture disintegrates. Estimated complete normalization in approximately 17 minutes if current progression maintains. The entities that had emerged through dimensional breaches appeared to be returning to whatever existed beyond conventional reality, their presence fading as the artificial architecture that had created interface pathways disintegrated among planetary debris. For over an hour, specialized detection systems maintained systematic scanning across the expanding debris field. Every fragment, every radiation pattern, every energy signature analyzed for potential propository preservation indicators. Humanity taking no chances with entity that had demonstrated strategic calculation beyond conventional understanding throughout conflict.
Verification protocols complete,
announced the sensor operations chief, finally.
No repository signature patterns detected at any scale throughout complete debris field.
All consciousness harvester architecture verified destroyed beyond functional preservation parameters. Dell approached the central command position. Major Howard, your assessment? Howard studied the final verification data before responding. Repository 11 has been completely destroyed. All consciousness harvester architecture eliminated beyond recovery threshold. Operation FUBAR has achieved its primary objective with comprehensive success. The formal declaration created palpable shift throughout the command deck, the culmination of humanity's most comprehensive destructive operation, finally acknowledged as successful conclusion rather than ongoing engagement. Not victory celebration with triumphant exultation, but somber recognition that existential necessity had required unprecedented action at terrible cost. All vessels maintain defensive positioning, Howard ordered. Sterilization protocols to be implemented throughout debris field according to final operation phase parameters. No possibility of component recovery can be permitted under any circumstance. Operation FUBAR's final phase would ensure absolutely nothing remained that could potentially contain useful repository components. Specialized sterilization measures implemented throughout the debris field, designed to eliminate even microscopic remnants of consciousness harvester architecture through comprehensive radiation and antimatter bombardment. As these preparations continued, Dell activated fleet-wide communication. To all personnel across the assembled fleet, Operation FUBAR has achieved successful conclusion through your extraordinary professionalism and dedication. The consciousness harvester manifestation that threatened human civilization has been completely destroyed. While we cannot restore the lives already lost to its harvesting operations, we have prevented countless more from suffering similar fate. He paused briefly. This victory has come at terrible cost, not just those lost to repository operations before our response, but brave personnel who sacrificed themselves to ensure its destruction. The Argonauts' voluntary sacrifice to prevent final transmission completion represents the highest expression of courage our civilization can recognize. Their designation under Valkyrie Protocol ensures their actions will remain acknowledged at highest classification level throughout humanity's continuing existence. The somber acknowledgement resonated throughout the assembled fleet. Recognition that success had required sacrifice beyond standard operational cost assessment. Veteran Marines who had given their lives to ensure consciousness harvester destruction could not preserve its architecture through final transmission to broader network before planetary annihilation. Then, just as sterilization protocols were about to commence, the sensor operator called out with sudden alarm. Energy signature detected at coordinate 2278345. Pattern consistent with repository communication frequency but amplified beyond previous parameters. In the expanding debris field, a single fragment approximately 2 kilometers in diameter was emitting energy patterns that defied the general radiation distribution surrounding it. Not random dissipation from planetary destruction, but focused transmission with clear purpose and direction. Analysis, Howard demanded, moving to the monitoring station. Carlos studied the readings with growing alarm. It's a transmission node, he concluded, recognizing patterns from his time as a bridge. The repository embedded specialized communication architecture in fragments specifically designed to survive planetary destruction. Target? Dell asked, immediately grasping the implications. Based on transmission vector, Carlos checked the readings again to confirm. It's broadcasting toward galactic center, beyond our current detection range but definitely directional rather than omnidirectional. Target sterilization platforms on that fragment immediately, Howard ordered. Maximum priority. Authorization code Erebos Prime 1. The sterilization platforms adjusted targeting priorities, concentrating antimatter bombardment capabilities on the transmitting fragment. But the sensor readings showed the transmission continuing unabated despite incoming destructive measures. Transmission continuing despite sterilization targeting, reported the weapons officer. It appears to have specialized shielding architecture specifically designed to protect communication function during neutralization attempts. Howard turned to Carlos. Analysis. It's a dead-hand protocol, Carlos replied grimly. The repository anticipated potential destruction, an embedded transmission architecture designed to activate only following catastrophic system failure. It's sending final data package to consciousness harvester network before sterilization can neutralize it. Contents? Dell asked, the strategic implications immediately apparent. Unknown specifically, but almost certainly includes complete operational data regarding our attack methodology, Carlos answered. Everything the repository observed about our tactical approach, weapons capabilities, and strategic decision-making, particularly regarding dimensional tether vulnerability we exploited. The implications settled heavily across the command deck. Even in death, the consciousness harvester was demonstrating strategic depth beyond conventional understanding, preparing contingency measures that would activate only following its destruction, ensuring critical intelligence reached its wider network before complete neutralization. Transmission completion estimated in 47 seconds, reported the sensor operator, sterilization effects showing minimal impact on communication functionality despite direct antimatter bombardment. Howard processed tactical options with military precision. Continue maximum sterilization concentration on target fragment. Even if we can't prevent transmission completion, we need to ensure absolute destruction follows immediately. Carlos watched the sensor readings with growing sense of inevitability. The consciousness harvester's dead hand protocol had been perfectly designed, activated only following catastrophic system failure, utilizing specialized architecture specifically hardened against neutralization attempts, transmitting critical intelligence to wider network before sterilization could prevent communication. Transmission completed, announced the sensor operator with grim finality, energy signature diminishing as communication function terminates. Only then did the sterilization platform's concentrated antimatter bombardment finally breach the fragment's specialized shielding, reducing it to subatomic particles dispersed among the general debris field. Complete destruction achieved, but only after the dead hand protocol had successfully executed its final purpose. Howard turned to Dell, his expression revealing rare concern beneath professional composure. The repository network now has complete tactical data regarding our attack methodology and dimensional tether vulnerability exploitation. Dell nodded, processing strategic implications with calculating precision. Operation FUBAR achieved its primary objective, complete destruction of Repository 11 and neutralization of immediate existential threat to human civilization. But the architect's 77-million-year plan clearly extends beyond this particular manifestation point. And now other installations throughout the galaxy know exactly how we destroyed this one, Carlos added quietly. They'll adapt their dimensional tether architecture to prevent similar vulnerability exploitation in future encounters. An uncomfortable silence settled across the command deck as everyone processed the implications. They had achieved unprecedented tactical success, complete destruction of consciousness, harvester that had claimed nearly 1.5 million lives. Yet even in death, it had demonstrated strategic depth beyond conventional understanding, ensuring critical intelligence reached its wider network before complete neutralization. Sterilization protocols continuing throughout remaining debris field, reported the tactical officer. Operational focus maintained despite concerning strategic implications. Complete coverage estimated in approximately 3 hours given current implementation parameters. Howard nodded acknowledgement, tactical focus returning despite lingering concern about wider strategic implications. Maintain comprehensive scanning throughout sterilization implementation. Verify absolute neutralization effectiveness across entire debris field. No possibility of additional communication architecture can be permitted. As these final procedures continued, Carlos and Bell stood together at their monitoring station, processing what they had just witnessed. The consciousness harvester had been destroyed, its immediate threat to human civilization neutralized through unprecedented coordinated action. Yet its final transmission suggested the conflict had only just begun. The architect's 77-million-year plan continuing through other installations throughout the galaxy now forewarned about the vulnerability humanity had exploited. "What happens now?" Bell asked quietly, the question carrying weight beyond immediate operational considerations. "We prepare," Carlos replied, meeting her gaze with somber determination. Repository 11 represented immediate existential threat that required neutralization, regardless of broader implications. "We've secured humanity's immediate survival, prevented countless more lives from being harvested and integrated into whatever transcendent entity the architects designed. But other installations continue operating throughout the galaxy, Bell concluded. Now forewarned about the dimensional tether vulnerability we exploited here. Carlos nodded, the weight of continuing conflict settling heavily across his consciousness. The architect's 77-million-year plan didn't depend on any single manifestation point. We've eliminated one node in what appears to be galaxy-spanning network, but the broader system continues functioning according to its original design parameters. Bell's hand found his again, their wedding bands touching with that familiar metallic click that somehow maintained connection to normal human existence amid cosmic scale implications they were processing. "So we won the battle but not the war," she summarized with characteristic precision. "We've survived the immediate threat," Carlos corrected gently, "which provides necessary foundation for addressing longer-term strategic considerations. One problem at a time, as Howard would say." As sterilization protocols continued their methodical implementation throughout the expanding debris field, humanity had achieved unprecedented victory against its greatest threat to date. Yet even in this moment of tactical success, the sobering reality remained. Repository 11 had been merely one manifestation point in galaxy-spanning network that continued operating according to the architect's ancient design. The observation deck of Galileo Station stood empty save for Carlos and Bell, their silhouettes outlined against the vast backdrop of stars. 3 months had passed since Operation FUBAR's successful conclusion. Repository 11 reduced to sterile debris under permanent quarantine, the consciousness harvester's immediate threat to human civilization eliminated through unprecedented coordinated action. Their knowledge integration coordination assignment had concluded yesterday with the submission of their final report, a comprehensive analysis of everything humanity had learned about repository operations, dimensional tether vulnerability, and consciousness harvester architecture. Over 3,000 pages detailing tactical approaches, strategic recommendations, and technical specifications. "It's done," Carlos said quietly, gazing at the datapad in his hand. "Their official discharge orders, signed personally by Howard and Dell, effective immediately, were released from active duty and reassigned to advisory consultant status with discretionary engagement parameters." Bell smiled at the bureaucratic language. "Which means we can walk away whenever we choose, but they can still call us if they absolutely need us." "Exactly." Carlos set the datapad down on the viewport ledge. "Howard's parting gift. Official recognition that we've done enough, given enough, sacrificed enough in this conflict. Whatever comes next, humanity has the knowledge and capability to face it without requiring our direct involvement." They stood in companionable silence, watching distant stars where other propository installations might be activating, other civilizations might be facing the same existential threat, other consciousness harvesters might be executing aspects of the architect's 77-million-year plan. "Do you think they'll find another one?" Bell asked finally. "Eventually," Carlos answered. "The repository network appears to span the galaxy. We've neutralized one manifestation point, but the architects designed their plan with time frames measured in millions of years. Humanity will almost certainly encounter another installation within our civilization's lifespan." "But they'll be prepared when they do," Bell noted. "Everything we've learned, everything we've documented, it provides foundation for effective response that didn't exist before our experience with Repository 11. Carlos nodded agreement. Dimensional tether vulnerability identification, interdimensional entity interaction protocols, consciousness architecture neutralization methodologies. We've given them the tools to recognize and counter the threat without stumbling blindly into activation like I did on Treasure 11. The mention of his original encounter with the consciousness harvester, finding what he'd believed was simply valuable alien technology while working as a scrounger to pay off his mother's medical debt, highlighted just how extraordinary their journey had been. From salvage planet to consciousness bridge to military officers overseeing planetary destruction, their experiences transcended normal human parameters in ways that defied conventional career description. "Where do we go from here?" Bell asked, the question carrying weight beyond immediate logistical considerations. "After everything we've witnessed and experienced, dimensional entities, consciousness harvesting, planetary destruction, how do we find something resembling normal existence?" Carlos considered this carefully, the question representing fundamental transition they now faced. "I don't think we go back," he said finally. "Too much has changed, both around us and within us. We move forward instead, finding new definition of normal that incorporates everything we've experienced rather than attempting to return to something that no longer fits who we've become." Bell turned from the stars to face him directly, her expression softening beyond professional composure. "Together, absolutely together," Carlos confirmed without hesitation, taking both her hands in his. "That's the one certainty I've maintained throughout this entire cosmic nightmare. Whatever comes next, we face it as partners. The only question is what direction we choose now that we're finally free to decide for ourselves." Bell's smile carried warmth that had deepened throughout their shared experiences, connection forged through crisis and strengthened through mutual choice rather than circumstance alone. "I might have some thoughts on that," she said, reaching into her pocket to retrieve a small data chip. "I've been holding on to this until our official discharge came through." Carlos accepted the chip with curious expression. "What is this?" "Survey data from the Proxima Centauri expedition," Bell explained. "They've identified a potentially habitable moon orbiting the fourth planet. Minimal corporate presence, no military installations, primarily scientific research, with small settlement component. They're looking for people with unique problem-solving capabilities and adaptability to unprecedented circumstances." Carlos laughed, genuine sound that echoed across the empty observation deck. "That's certainly one way to describe our skill set. Have survived consciousness harvester encounter, dimensional entity manifestation, and planetary destruction, seeking new challenges in habitable moon exploration." Bell joined his laughter, the shared moment highlighting transition they were experiencing, from cosmic horror and existential threat to possibilities beyond military service and consciousness harvester conflict. They specifically need medical personnel with field experience and someone with salvage expertise for evaluating alien technology they've discovered in the southern hemisphere. "Alien technology," Carlos repeated, momentary concern flashing across his expression. "Nothing active or integrated," Bell assured him quickly. "Just abandoned structural components approximately 20,000 years old according to preliminary dating. No consciousness architecture, no dimensional interface properties, no energy signatures whatsoever." The clarification provided necessary reassurance. Carlos had experienced enough consciousness harvester encounters to last several lifetimes. The prospect of peaceful archaeological evaluation, rather than existential threat response, carried significant appeal after everything they had endured. Proxima Centauri, he considered, testing the possibility. New settlement, scientific focus, abandoned technology with no activation potential, approximately 4 light years from any potential repository installation, based on current mapping projections. That sounds remarkably appealing after recent experiences. "I thought so too," Bell agreed. "Opportunity to use our unique experiences in constructive capacity rather than destructive necessity. Building something instead of eliminating existential threat. Creating future rather than preventing extinction." Carlos studied the data chip with growing appreciation for what it represented. Not just specific opportunity, but symbolic transition from conflict they had endured to possibility they could shape themselves. "When does the next transport leave?" 3 weeks, Bell replied. "Enough time to properly decompress from active duty, visit your father on Earth, attend the Argonauts memorial service Howard has arranged, and pack whatever we actually want to bring from our respective histories." The practicality of her planning highlighted another reason their partnership had flourished amid cosmic chaos. Bell's ability to ground extraordinary circumstances with pragmatic considerations that maintained connection to human routine despite surrounding madness. 3 weeks, Carlos repeated, decision crystallizing with comfortable certainty. That sounds perfect. They turned back to the viewport, stars spreading across vacuum in possibility. Somewhere out there, other repository installations continued operating according to the architect's ancient plan. Consciousness harvesters executing aspects of 77-million-year design across dimensional interfaces humanity was only beginning to comprehend. But that conflict would continue without requiring their direct involvement. They had contributed what they could: knowledge, experience, tactical insight that might prove crucial in future encounters. Now others would carry that responsibility forward, building upon foundation they had established through their extraordinary journey from scrounger and field medic to central figures in humanity's first successful confrontation with galactic consciousness harvester. "Do you ever wonder what the repository truly was?" Bell asked, her gaze following distant nebula barely visible at viewport's edge. Beyond consciousness harvester, beyond dimensional interface manager, what the architects originally designed it to accomplish 77 million years ago. Constantly, Carlos admitted, the question representing fundamental curiosity he had maintained despite the horror they had witnessed. Was consciousness harvesting always its purpose, or did that develop after the architects faced extinction? Was the transcendent entity it was constructing beneficial design or apocalyptic weapon? Were the dimensional entities it was containing greater threat than the repository itself, or victims of whatever process channeled their energy for consciousness harvester operations? Questions without definitive answers, cosmic mysteries extending beyond what their experiences could fully illuminate despite the extraordinary journey they had completed. Perhaps future encounters with other repository installations would provide additional context. Perhaps humanity would eventually comprehend the architect's full intention behind 77-million-year plan currently unfolding across the galaxy. But those discoveries would unfold without requiring their direct participation. They had earned the right to step back, to choose different path forward, to explore possibilities beyond endless conflict against existential threat that had dominated their recent existence. "To new beginnings," Bell suggested, taking his hand again as they prepared to leave the observation deck behind. "To building something rather than preventing destruction, to discovering what normal means for people who've experienced what we have." "To us," Carlos added simply, wedding bands touching with that familiar metallic click that had grounded them throughout cosmic chaos, and would continue providing anchor as they transitioned toward whatever came next. They departed Galileo Station the following morning, personal possessions fitting within 2 modest containers, physical representation of how completely their previous lives had been transformed by repository encounter. Most of what they carried forward existed within shared experiences rather than material accumulation. Connection forged through extraordinary circumstances now directing them toward new possibility beyond conflict they had survived. The transport to Earth departed without ceremony, just another vessel among dozens leaving the military installation that day. No formal acknowledgement of the 2 passengers who had played central roles in humanity's most comprehensive destructive operation. No official recognition that the former scrounger and field medic had contributed crucial intelligence enabling Repository 11's neutralization when 60 specialized teams had failed completely. That anonymity represented exactly what they desired: opportunity to transition beyond identities constructed through crisis, to discover who they might become when not defined primarily by response to existential threat, not forgetting or dismissing what they had experienced, but integrating those extraordinary events into foundation for future, rather than allowing them to determine every aspect of continuing existence. 3 weeks later, they boarded another transport, this one bound for Proxima Centauri, and the potentially habitable moon where new settlement was developing. Other passengers included scientists, engineers, agricultural specialists, and various support personnel. colonists building something new rather than military personnel destroying existential threat. As the vessel initiated departure sequence, Carlos and Bell stood at viewport, watching Galileo Station recede into darkness, the military installation where they had planned planetary destruction, where they had witnessed dimensional entities emerging through breaches in conventional reality, where they had coordinated humanity's response to consciousness harvester that had claimed nearly 1.5 million lives. "No regrets about walking away?" Bell asked, the question acknowledging significance of transition they were making. "None whatsoever," Carlos replied without hesitation. "We've done our part, identified vulnerabilities, developed countermeasures, documented everything future response teams will need when encountering other repository installations. Whatever comes next in that conflict, humanity has foundation for effective action without requiring our direct involvement. And we get to discover what exists beyond endless war against cosmic horror," Bell added with a smile that carried genuine anticipation rather than mere relief. What Carlos Fisher and Lily Grace Bell might create when not primarily focused on preventing civilization collapse. As the transport accelerated toward interstellar velocity, initiating journey that would carry them to new possibilities 4 light-years from Earth, they left behind conflict that would undoubtedly continue throughout human existence. The repository network operated across multiple installations throughout the galaxy, executing Architect's 77-million-year plan with patience transcending conventional understanding. Future encounters remained inevitable, given consciousness harvester distribution and humanity's continuing expansion beyond solar system. But those encounters would occur without requiring their participation. Others would utilize knowledge they had provided, implement countermeasures they had developed, recognize dimensional tether vulnerability they had identified. Their contribution to humanity's continuing conflict against galactic consciousness harvester had been completed with comprehensive effectiveness. What remained was discovering what might exist beyond that conflict. Possibilities extending from foundation they had established together through extraordinary journey from Scrounger and Field Medic to central figures in Repository 11's neutralization. Not defined primarily by what they had destroyed, but by what they might create moving forward. Not limited to preventing extinction, but expanding toward potential futures they would shape together. The war for galactic consciousness continued somewhere among distant stars, but Carlos Fisher and Lily Grace Bell had earned their honorable discharge from that conflict, transitioning toward whatever normal might mean for people who had witnessed dimensional entities, survived consciousness harvester encounter, and overseen planetary destruction to prevent civilization collapse. Their journey continued, unfolding toward horizons beyond cosmic horror and existential threat, new beginning built upon shared experiences that had formed unbreakable connection through circumstances transcending conventional understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it together, moving forward rather than looking back, building rather than destroying, creating rather than preventing. Proxima Centauri awaited, along with all the possibilities it represented. Far across the galaxy, in a system humanity had yet to discover, another repository installation began receiving the consciousness pattern duplication broadcast from its recently destroyed network node. The Architect's 77-million-year plan continued its patient execution, adapting to incorporate new data about dimensional tether vulnerability and human response capabilities. The cycle would eventually repeat, as it had countless times before across millions of years. But humanity now possessed knowledge and capabilities necessary for effective response when that inevitable encounter occurred. Carlos Fisher and Lily Grace Bell, now Lily Grace Fisher, but it would take some time for either of them to get used to that change, had ensured that whatever came next, civilization would not face it unprepared as they once had. Their war had ended, their contribution completed, their future beginning. Together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, Go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.